My name is Andrea Topper. I am the Nutrient Management Outreach Specialist with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. This is the third webinar in our series of webinars directed towards certified crop advisors. How do we meet NRCS 590 requirements? And what are those requirements? Let's take a quick look at this presentation and learn more about what our state-specific 590 requirements are and how we can be compliant with them within our nutrient management plans. To start us off, we're going to briefly review our state policy overview and kind of how our different state entities work together. The first rule that we're going to talk about is NR 151. NR 151 is our state ag performance standards, and it states that every farmer or producer that is applying manure and or fertilizer must have a nutrient management plan. It does not tell us what or how to have that nutrient management plan. It just says you must have one. We then have ATCAP 50, DATCAP's rule. ATCAP 50 goes a step further and says, we acknowledge that you must have a nutrient management plan, but this is the pieces that you have to have within a nutrient management plan for it to be compliant. This is how many soil samples you might need, all of those fun little details. We get those details specifically from the NRCS 590 Nutrient Management Practice Standard. So even though there's kind of a tiered approach here and we have three different entities, they're all kind of working together towards that same goal. And each one of these pieces has a little bit different job. So DNR says we must have a nutrient management plan. DATCAP says this is how you're compliant with your nutrient management plan. And the way that we do that is through our 590 NRCS standard. That 590 NRCS standard, the definition is managing the amount, whether that's the rate, source, placement, method of application, and timing of plant nutrients and soil amendments. It's going to apply to every field where nutrients and manure, or I should say nutrients, whether that be fertilizer or manure, is applied. Within our standard, we have specific criteria. We have criteria for protecting our surface and groundwater resources, as well as minimizing entry of nutrients to groundwater. And again, we have minimizing of nutrients to surface water as well. Under each of those criteria, we're going to find and identify different application restrictions and prohibitions. Alongside the 590 Nutrient Management Standard, we have the Wisconsin Technical Note 1. It's our companion document to the 590 standard. The 590 standard outlines specific things, and then we turn to the tech note for some further deeper dives in with more information. The tech note will provide us detailed guidance on strict specifics regarding minimum requirements for the 590 nutrient management plan, minimum requirements for a winter spreading plan. It'll talk about options for enhanced nutrient management planning, as well as give us guidance for determining manure nutrient credits. One of the pieces that is found within the tech note is our minimum requirements for a nutrient management plan. This is basically going to walk you through what are the different aspects that are needed within a nutrient management plan. First and foremost, we need our plan narrative. This is going to tell us, give us an overview of this operation. Is it a grazing operation? Is it a dairy herd? Is it a small beef calf-cow operation? We can also touch on some other things. What kind of crops are we growing? Do we have manure storage? What do we do for manure hauling? Do we do it just in the spring? Do we do it in spring and fall? Do we do daily haul? Do we plant cover crops? What kind of tillage practices do we do? All of those are things that are going to add to your story. And when you're going and opening up a nutrient management plan, the first place I always tend to look is the narrative to give me a good idea of what's going on in that operation so that I have a better idea as I move through the plan what I should be looking for. The next piece is aerial photography and or maps of the farm. We used the Snap Maps portion of Snap Plus to help us meet the requirements within this section. So we want to make sure that we see all of our field boundaries and that those field boundaries have names and associated acreage alongside of them. We are also interested in knowing the soil information found within our fields, as well as the specific locations so that we can identify if there's any spreading restrictions or prohibitions. Additionally, we need field-specific documentation of that cropping rotation. Is that going to be a corn, soybean rotation? Or is it corn, soybeans, 4 years of alfalfa, and then going back into corn and soybeans? Within that, we need to make sure that we have the dominant critical soil type as well as the predominant soil type. We will touch more on why we need those in the fourth webinar. Previous and current years nutrient application rates, including the form, rate, and timing. We need to know how much of our fertilizer and or manure we might be putting out, making sure that we're meeting our crop's nutrient need and not exceeding it. We need to know our soil test information. Our soil test information is going to be the basis of our nutrient management plan. It's going to help us to determine how much fertilizer and or manure nutrients we need to apply to our fields to meet the remaining crop need. We also need to make sure that we are utilizing NRCS's soil loss estimate for erosion, the Russell II equation. Thankfully for us, the Russell II equation is built into the backside of SNAP Plus. So as you go in and enter in the specific cropping information, SNAP Plus will be running Russell II in the background and verifying compliance for you. There are specific soil sampling requirements. There's a couple different aspects of soil sampling requirements. There is specifics to how many samples need to be pulled and how often. Those specifics are going to be outlined in A2809. But additionally, there's specifics on what tests need to be ran and that they need to be sent through a DATCAP certified lab. We are requiring that we have pH, phosphorus, potassium, and organic matter for every soil sample. How do we know how many soil samples we need to pull for each field? It's going to depend on whether a field falls within the responsive or non-responsive range. A field is considered to be in the responsive range if either soil test P or potassium K levels are in the high category or lower. If a field has soil test P and K levels that are very high or excessively high, that is deemed a non-responsive field. In a non-responsive field, you're going to see a different suggested number of samples. Whereas if our fields are in the responsive range, all of our fields, no matter what the acreage size, is going to need 1 sample for every 5 acres. The non-responsive fields, you're going to see that there is a downward trend in how many samples are needed based on the total amount of acres that you have. Sometimes you might be wondering, well, SNAP Plus says that I don't have enough soil samples, but I thought I did. There is some rounding that goes in to the background. So when you're rounding, 0 to 4 is always going to round down, and 5 to 9 is going to round up. So looking at our responsive fields here in example 2, we have a field size that has 58 acres. 58 divided by 5 is 11.6. 11.6 rounds to 12. So that 6 is going to round up to 12. Therefore, 12 samples are required. Whereas in example 3, we have a field that is 6 acres. 6 acres divided by 5 equals 1.2. 1.2 rounds down to 1, okay, because we have that 2 there. 1 sample is going to be required in that situation. Specifically in those non-responsive fields, it's going to be based on the field size. So we have a little bit of a range here. If your field is 15 to 25 acres, you need 3 samples, whereas if your field is 61 to 80 acres, you need 6 samples, just to give a couple examples. The tech note also outlines for us the minimum requirements of what is required within a winter spreading plan. So winter spreading plan's job is to help us identify the quantity of manure and or organic byproducts that are going to be spread during periods of frozen or snow-covered ground. It's going to be how much of that manure is going to be spread during that time period, or how much manure is generated in 14 days, whichever is greater. Additionally, we need to identify the capacity of storage for each type of manure that's going to be generated on the operation. We can do that by documenting our storage methods in SNAP Plus. Capacity for stacking manure that is going to be greater than 16% dry matter without permanent storage. So again, just documenting in our maps where we might have stacking sites, as well as writing a piece in the narrative explaining what our stacking capacity and plans are going to be for our greater than 16% dry matter. Winter spreading implementation maps. Again, SNAP Maps is really helpful with this. And we already have our field boundaries, names, and acreage of all of our fields mapped out. Now we're going to want to look at our specific layers and potential restrictions within SNAP Maps and turn those layers on so that we can then see where are our restricted areas. We also need to make sure that we have identified our planned mitigation practices, which could be our winter spreading practices. For example, we have restrictions on fields that have greater than 6% slope and concentrated flow channels flowing within them. In those situations, you're required to implement 2 winter spreading strategies. As long as you implement those winter spreading strategies and you're still following the other winter spreading rules, you're allowed to spread on those fields. We also need to make sure that our nutrient management plans are demonstrating that we have enough acreage to spread our manure on. The way that we do that is through planning and allocation of manure amounts in SNAP Plus. So in order for SNAP Plus to identify that we have enough acreage to be able to apply our manure and apply it properly, we need to have the past year's data entered in, the current cropping year's data entered in, as well as 1 year into the future's data entered into SNAP Plus. On top of that, we need to make sure that we have our manure calculations and estimates built into the program and our manure allocated in each of those individual years. So 3 years of manure needs to be planned out. And within those 3 years, we need to make sure that we're using 90% of our estimated amount of manure generated. If that is completed, SNAP Plus will automatically identify on the 590 checklist that the farm has enough acreage for spreading manure. Again, it's really important that when you're in SNAP Plus, you're updating your manure sources and manure amounts so that the program can calculate properly how much manure you have versus how much you're planning to spread. All right, let's pivot just a little bit here and talk about phosphorus and potassium nutrient recommendations. Annual P and K recommendations can be combined into a single application as long as it does not exceed the total nutrient recommendation for the entirety of the rotation. So in a given year, a crop's phosphorus need might be 50 pounds, but throughout a 4-year rotation, each year has a requirement of 50 pounds, you would be able to apply in that first year up to 200 pounds of phosphorus. If you applied 250 pounds of phosphorus, SNAP Plus would remind you that that is an overapplication. As long as you are not applying over the crop nutrient need for the crops within your rotation, SNAP Plus allows for that single application, whether that be for phosphorus or potassium. Specifically for commercial phosphorus fertilizers that are not supposed to be applied to soils that are testing excessively high for P, we have a couple exceptions. If we are going to be planting corn, we are allowed to plan up to 20 pounds per acre of P205 starter fertilizer, as long as it is documented in the spring and it's documented as subsurface. As you can see in the guidance message down at the bottom, P205 applied as starter to corn should be applied at planting and placed subsurface or in a band in close proximity to the seed. I previously had my diammonium phosphate, my DAP, going out at the correct rate of 50 pounds, giving me 23 pounds of phosphorus. but my spread method was incorporated. Once I change that to subsurface, my guidance message will disappear and that compliance message will not appear on my NM2 compliance check report. It's important to make sure that we're changing our spreading method to subsurface in order to account for that pre-plant starter application of phosphorus. We also want to make sure that we're accounting for the variability in N mineralization and manure applications. So when we're doing 100% of our crop need with manure, we're allowed an additional 20 pounds per acre of commercial fertilizer nitrogen that can be applied as starter. So if we're planning on getting all of our nutrient need from manure, we are able to apply an additional 20 pounds of nitrogen as a starter fertilizer as well. All right, let's talk about rescue N treatment. Rescue N treatment is going to be allowed when we have an excessive rainfall event that has caused a nitrogen deficiency within our crops. You're allowed to apply up to 46 pounds per acre of in-season supplemental nitrogen, as long as we have documented that there is a need, that there is a crop nutrient need. Some methods in which you can document a crop nutrient need would be utilizing the pre-sidedress nitrogen test, tissue testing, using a chlorophyll meter, or other nitrogen management models. If you want to apply more than 46 pounds per acre, two different methods must be used to document the need. So other information that should be collected when you are considering an estimation of nitrogen loss from excessive rainfall, we should be documenting the date, the rate, and the form of the nitrogen application, the amount of time that elapsed between that N application and your excessive rainfall event, how much rainfall did you actually have, and how long did that rainfall event happen. We can also look specifically at soil water holding capacity, soil aeration and saturation, the amount of time that the soil was saturated, soil temperature, and just general overall appearance of the crop. This is all information that should be collected and kept as documentation so that if there is ever a question about making sure that you proved that there was a need for additional nutrients, you have this information ready to go. Manure analysis. Manure analysis shall be collected for 3 or more consecutive years as necessary to establish a baseline. After establishing that baseline, samples should be collected once every 4 years. If no operational changes occur, less frequent manure testing is allowable. If you do not have manure analysis, you are able to use an average or a book value. There is a table within UW Extension 82809, Table 9.3. And if you look at part 4 of Table 3, you are going to see the specifics allowing for book value usage. Organic byproducts other than manure shall be analyzed for total N, ammonium N, total P, total K, and solids content and applied to fields in accordance with the standard and any applicable regulations. There tend to be a lot of questions regarding biosolid analysis. Biosolid analysis do not look like regular manure analysis. We do have a feature within SNAP Plus that if you select biosolid as the nutrient source, you can then click to the right of the biosolid name and it will open up a box which you are then able to enter in the nutrient numbers off of your biosolids report, and SNAP Plus will automatically convert them into our normal manure analysis numbers that we are used to seeing. If you have a if you have a biosolid analysis and you're struggling to be able to figure out how to enter that in, there is a video on the SNAP Plus YouTube page about entering in biosolid analysis, as well as a quick write-up on the SNAP Plus website, as well as on the Nutrient Management Training webpage within DATCAP's website. that would give more information on importing and entering biosolid analysis. Nutrient application prohibitions. So this is when nutrients should not be spread on these examples. Surface water, we cannot be spreading manure on, as well as saturated soils, areas of active snowmelt where water is flowing, concentrated flow channels, non-harvested vegetative buffers, except if we're establishing perennial vegetation in that concentrated flow channel, or non-harvested vegetative buffers. All of those are areas in which manure, or I should say nutrient applications, are prohibited. Additionally, a non-farmed wetland, any potable well or direct conduits to groundwater, and then within 50 feet of these features, unless you're directly depositing manure through gleaning or pasturing of animals, or if you're applying fertilizer to corn as a starter. Additionally, within 8 feet of irrigation wells, where land vegetation is not removed mechanically or by grazing, except to provide nutrients for establishment and maintenance of a conservation practice. Additionally, fields that are exceeding tolerable soil loss are not allowed to receive nutrient applications. Let's look a little bit more specifically at some of these prohibitions. As I briefly mentioned, wells and other conduits to groundwater have a 50-foot buffer around them. So in this example, this red circle is showing us our 50-foot buffer. This white and black line is a field boundary. So we have this red buffer that falls within our field boundary. That is a no spread zone for nutrients, whether that be manure and or fertilizer. The only thing that is allowed to happen within this red circle is the gleaning or pasturing of animals. So animals are allowed to deposit their own manure within that red area. We are not allowed to do mechanical applications of manure within that red zone. Additionally, the only fertilizer that is allowed to be applied within this red zone is if we are planting corn in this field and we are doing a corn starter. Other than private wells, there are a couple other direct conduits to groundwater that we can consider. Sinkholes, swallows, fractured bedrock at the surface, quarries or mines, tile inlets discharging to groundwater. Those are all direct conduits to groundwater, all in which us as planners need to make sure that we're documenting and accounting for within our nutrient management plan in the SNAP Maps portion of SNAP Plus. A couple more specific types of wells that you might see. We have community potable water wells, municipal wells. Those aren't going to be mapped for us in SNAP Plus. Those are going to have a 1,000-foot buffer around them. Non-community potable water wells, public wells such as church wells, schools, or restaurants, are not mapped within SNAP Maps. It is our job as planners to make sure that we are mapping those features accordingly. The standard states that no manure applications can happen within 1,000 feet of those community wells and 100 feet of a non-community well, unless the manure is treated to substantially eliminate pathogens. Again, I always like to just say, yes, this is written into the 590 standard that if you substantially treat your manure to eliminate pathogens, you're able to apply within those areas. But just know that there's always that risk. And is that farmer willing to take that risk of applying manure within there, even though it might be treated? There might not be that guarantee that all of the pathogens have been eliminated and there wouldn't be some sort of event that would happen or that could lead to a water contamination event. Always err on the side of caution. All right, let's talk about surface water quality management areas, what are fondly known as SWGMAs. Within SWGMAs, we are going to see a couple different requirements or reductions in the amount of manure that can be applied. We have two different types of SWGMAs. In this example on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can kind of see that there's a pond underneath. We have these lines that are jutting to the upper right. That is that 1,000-foot buffer that you're going to find around ponds and lakes. In between DK4 and DK3, we have what looks to be a small stream running through. Those blue lines are jutting to the upper left, and that is going to be a 300-foot buffer that you find around streams and rivers. Manure applications, specific liquid manure applications, are limited to 12,000 gallons per acre or less, anywhere within a field boundary that you see these blue hash marks. So in DK3, we have some edge of field swigmas that are creeping in on our field boundary. And in those areas, a 12,000 gallon per acre rate is required. Or I should say, the maximum amount that can be applied within that field is 12,000 gallons. Additionally, if you want to be able to apply manure within a surface water quality management area, you need to choose one of the following out of the list. Install and maintain vegetative buffers or filter strips. Maintain greater than 30% cover after a nutrient application. Incorporate within 3 days after the application. Plant a crop prior to, at, or immediately after the application. Or apply nutrients within 7 days of planting on long-term no-till soils with less than 30% residue. Again, one of these strategies needs to be chosen and implemented. SNAP Plus is able to identify if these practices are being implemented or not. If they are not, SNAP Plus will tell you that you are not allowed to apply manure within that SWGMA. As long as it can identify that one of these practices are being implemented, that manure application is able to move forward. Let's pivot a little bit here and talk about our nitrogen-restricted soils. Nitrogen-restricted soils are soils that are going to be at high risk for leaching, or they have shallow depth to bedrock. Specifically, when it comes to nitrogen-restricted soils, we're going to be talking about late summer or fall manure or organic byproduct applications. Depending on the soil type that you have, you're going to see limited rates either at 90 or 120 pounds of available N per acre. And again, that's going to depend on whether you have a P soil, a permeable soil, a W soil, a wet soil. A wet soil is going to be less than 12 inches to the water table if you were to start to dig a hole. Our R soils, which is shallow depth to bedrock, meaning within 20 inches of digging a hole, you would hit bedrock. So let's look at the specifics within those scenarios. So for a late summer or fall manure application that is going to have greater than 4% dry matter, if you're applying to W or W combination soils, limit that application to 120 pounds of available N, or look at the rates within 82809, whichever is less. So in this situation, you're either going to apply 120 pounds of available N, or if you're growing a crop that does not have a nutrient need of 120 pounds, maybe it's 90 pounds, you would then be limited to that 90 pounds because that is the lesser one in this example. On permeable and shallow depth bedrock soils, if you have established cover crops or an overwintering annual crop or a perennial crop, you're going to limit your rate to 120 pounds. Or looking at rates in A2809, whichever is less. For annual crops that are not going to be planted until spring or summer, delay that application until soil temperatures are less than 50 degrees. And limit that application then to 120 pounds of available N or rates in A2809, whichever is less. Very similarly, we're still talking about late summer and fall manure applications, but we're looking at manure that has less than 4% dry matter, so our very liquidy manure. On W or W combination soils, limit your application to 90 pounds of available N per acre, or you can use 120 pounds and implement one of the following. So you're either going to apply on an established cover crop or an overwintering annual crop or a perennial crop. You could use a nitrification inhibitor. You could establish a cover crop within 2 weeks of the application. You could surface apply and then not incorporate for at least 3 days. Or you could delay that application until soil temperatures are less than 50 degrees. On our P and R soils, limit the application to 120 pounds of available N per acre. Additionally, delay that application until soil temps are less than 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can use a nitrification inhibitor or surface apply and then do not incorporate for at least 3 days. So that one's a little bit trickier. You have 3 aspects to consider. So we're limiting to 120 pounds. We're waiting until soil temps are less than 50 degrees. And then we're either going to add in a nitrification inhibitor or surface apply and not incorporate for 3 days. We briefly touched on this in the beginning of this presentation when we were talking through what a winter spreading plan is. But what qualifies as winter? It's not necessarily December 1st through the end of February. It's specific to when soil temperatures are either frozen or the snow prevents effective incorporation. So if we have frozen ground or a specific depth of snow and that does not allow for us to incorporate manure, that will be deemed a manure application in the winter season. All right, we talked about SWGMAs earlier. Let's touch on them again about the specifics during the winter time. Again, this is our blue hash mark that's falling within our field boundary. We were able to apply manure to that area in the non-winter season, just at a reduced rate, and we had to make sure that we were implementing one of the strategies. In the winter, though, our SWGMAs turn into a no spread zone. Again, this is a map that I was able to create in Snap Maps. This red zone is mimicking the boundary of this SWGMA. Again, no mechanical manure applications are allowed within the SWGMA during the winter season. What is allowed, though, is gleaning or pasturing of animals within the SWGMA. So if this was a field that was planted into corn stalks and I'm overwintering some cattle out here on these corn stalks, they would be allowed to roam within that red area. They could deposit their manure within that area as well. It's mechanical applications of manure that are prohibited. Additionally, in the winter, manure applications cannot exceed the pea removal of the following growing season's crop. This is really important. Not only do we need to make sure that we're planning our current year, but we also need to be looking out a year into the future. And why do we need to do this? For this specific bullet point right here is just one of the reasons. We need to know what our following crop is going to be when we apply a manure application. So if I'm applying a manure application in the winter, I need to know what I'm going to be planting this next spring, because that crop is then going to determine what amount of manure I can put out based on the pea removal of that crop. On top of that, I need to limit all of my winter manure applications to 60 pounds of P2O5 or whichever is less, and limit liquid manure applications to 7,000 gallons per acre. We have a couple other little kind of caveat situations, so let's touch on those briefly. Again, this is specific to winter applications of manure. Previously, we talked about direct conduits to groundwater. In the top image here, you can see we have that red 50-foot buffer around that private well. In the winter months, though, that 50-foot buffer turns into a 300-foot no spread zone. So that's what's going to be kind of that greenish color. That is that 300-foot zone of no spread of nutrients, whether that be fertilizer or manure, near that conduit to groundwater. Additionally, liquid manure is not allowed to be spread in February and March on areas of shallow Silurian, as well as areas in which there are DNR well compensation boundaries. So in the middle here, we have a shallow Silurian field that has 0 to 5 foot depth of bedrock. In this field, we would not be able to apply liquid manure in February and March in anywhere that yellow checkered pattern is present. In the DNR well compensation area, you can see that red hash marked area. It's generally about a quarter section of land that is sectioned off due to a previously contaminated well, specifically due to livestock contamination. So these are areas that the DNR have designated as areas in which a well had previously been contaminated. If your field boundary falls within one of these red hash marked zones, you are not allowed to apply liquid manure in February and March. Additionally, in the winter, you are not allowed to apply manure or organic byproducts on slopes greater than 6% unless the plan documents that there's no other accessible fields present or available to spread on. As long as you implement two or more of the following practices, you are allowed to spread on fields that have slopes greater than 6%. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I did not go through the specifics of all of the winter spreading strategies, but let's do that now. Again, out of this list of 5 practices, we need to choose and implement 2. We're either going to utilize contour buffer strips or contour strip cropping. We could leave all crop residue and do no fall tillage. We could apply manure in intermittent strips on no more than 50% of the field. We could apply manure on no more than 25% of the field during each application, and then wait a minimum of 14 days between applications. We could reduce our manure application to 3,500 gallons or 30 pounds of P2O5, whichever is less. Similarly to the fields that have slopes greater than 6%, we also have a rule that states you are not allowed to apply manure or organic byproducts to fields where concentrated flow channels are present unless 2 or more of the following are implemented. So if you have a concentrated flow channel, such as a grass waterway, a ditch, or a non-eroding channel present within the field, our rule says you're not allowed to apply manure unless you implement 2 of our winter spreading strategies. In this list, 1 through 5 is exactly the same in regards to our greater than 6% slopes list, but 6 and 7, the 2 points down at the bottom of the screen, are going to be new ones specifically for situations where we have concentrated flow channels present within fields. So you could put a 200-foot buffer around all of your concentrated flow channels and apply no manure, or you could do fall tillage on the contour and you have slopes that are lower than 6%. Again, choosing 2 strategies out of this list of 7 allows you to be able to apply manure to fields that have concentrated flow channels. That wraps up our presentation regarding meeting the 590 compliance standard within our nutrient management plans. If you ever have any questions regarding rules that are built within SNAP Plus or anything specific to the 590 standard, do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email and phone number are below. Thank you again for participating with us today.